They could not have expected, nor would they have wished to see as much of the mad and macabre as they could see that day.
Where do you think you're going if you haven't yet understood the difference between life and me?
Gene had to say, it was on my dad's list of things to do, but the house thing first.
Well, you said that was an accident.
I lied. The house is alive. We're all gonna die.
Live, lost in the basement, or maybe it's the attic, bathroom, somewhere inside the Winchester mansion. I'm Corey.
I'm Maddie.
And I'm David.
And we are the Hallow-Holics Anonymous.
I've got a brief synopsis of the history of a haunted house horror, if y'all would like me to go through that.
Oh, awesome. Yeah.
I would, but before we start, I feel like I'm a little bit mad at you, and I might be mad at David too, depending on how he feels about
What did I do?
Well, I don't know if you did anything yet, but we're about to find out.
Okay.
So, Radius, Maddie.
Yes?
You told me to watch Radius. I watched Radius. I like the idea behind it. I like the whole 50-foot radius, everybody dies thing. But the movie is so melodramatic, poorly written. I figured out that dude was a serial killer the minute they showed the girl's missing twin sister.
Okay.
Like, I was so disappointed in that film. It's the first time you've steered me wrong, and I just wanted to let you know.
Okay.
It's a free movie on Netflix. Well, I mean, it's not totally free, but I mean, it's streaming on Netflix. I mean,
I've got one... What?
I did watch it, yeah. It was okay. Yeah, it was pretty
All right,
good.
and I'm afraid I have to be a little bit angry at you too, David.
Sorry.
Okay, well, just think about it from this perspective, because when I thought about it after I'd watched the movie, it made me like the ending a little bit more, all right? So This man, in the very end, clearly he had somehow redeemed himself or become a completely different person after he lost his memories, right? Mm-hmm. I think their experience with whatever cosmic force attacked them, I think the evil inside him was turned into a destructive force outside him, and that's why he regained his humanity. And somehow she was keeping that evil at bay because they had been there during that accident.
I just feel bad for all the people that had to die for him to get his humanity back. That kind of sucks.
Maybe. Yeah, that's true. I mean, a lot of people died just for some serial killer. But I think more what actually happened was the dude just hadn't regained all of his, or lost all of his humanity again before he offed himself. I think he would have gone right back to doing what he's doing.
Can you think of anything that would have made the movie better? If anything that could have saved it?
I think that if they would have not, I mean, that's a really hard plot. I think that if they would have just kept it, if they either would have explained it a little bit better or just the guy, I don't think the dude needed to be a serial killer to have this plot still work. I think that this just could have been something that happened to him and he had to deal with it, and all just could have been random. I don't think they really needed this heavy-handed potential moral at the end of it, even though I don't actually think it was a moral.
Okay, you just failed my surprise test on you.
Oh, shit.
You were supposed to say 80s teen heartthrob Scott Valentine, Corey.
Oh, son of a bitch, Scott Valentine. I'm so
Missed it.
sorry. I love you.
Missed the
I
opportunity.
love you. But maybe that's what it was. Maybe off camera. Maybe Scott Valentine is probably further evolved than the rest of us. I assume we agree on that. Therefore, he probably has access to technology we can't even imagine yet.
Uh-huh.
So maybe he was up there trying to make this was an experiment, trying to make this serial killer become a better person, and it just failed. But Scott's playing on a whole different level. The death didn't necessarily matter to him because this was for the human race.
Yeah, it's all a part of his greater plan.
Yeah, exactly.
So ultimately, the main flaw with Radius was that we all failed Scott Valentine yet again.
If I look at it that way, I like the movie, and I'm very, very sorry I brought it up.
In this episode, we are discussing haunted house horror films, which can trace themselves back to the old dark house genre, which got its name from the 1932 film The Old Dark House. Usually these were murder mysteries or thrillers in disguise as ghost films until the very end. When the 60s rolled around, it became far more about the supernatural as film became a lot more colorful and experimental. The Haunting in 1963 is the epitome of the perfect gray area between the supernatural and the psyche. There's often a balance between them, as you see with Amityville Horror, when the primary danger is the possession of the father, while the other signs of the demonic haunting only add to it. Then, of course, you have Dan Curtis's Burnt Offerings, which I can't recommend enough. Much like The Haunting, the main villain of this film is the house itself, who is almost indistinguishable from the old woman's ghost residing within it, or within her victims. There is no subgenre of horror that has been so long-lasting throughout the decades as the haunted house, old dark house trope. While slashers, vampire movies, creature features, and the like come and go in waves of maybe 5 to 10 year periods, you can always trust haunted house stories to be recounted in a dozen ways on the big screen and especially in TV shows. Haunted houses can be incorporated, too, into any subgenre. It's incredibly easy to do so, since most horror depends on one creature, and all of them depend on a setting. Ultimately, in haunted house horror, it's seldom easy to tell the difference between a haunted house and a haunted man or woman. The Shining, in its multiple incarnations, proves this.
Yeah, I mean, there's something very uncomfortable about having your personal and private space, your home, basically being invaded or being possessed by some kind of like malevolent force. I kind of have you guys read the Turn of the Screw by Henry James?
I haven't read.
No, I haven't.
The Turn of the Screw is about this governess who goes to this estate called Bly. The master of the house is living in London and tells her that his niece and nephew have recently been orphaned because their parents have died. He tells her that she can basically have like full charge of the estate and the children there, as long as like she doesn't have any like communication with him at all. So she eventually arrives at the estate. She begins her duties and eventually like sees these like two spectral figures roaming the grounds, observing her and the children. The caretaker, Mrs. Grouse, she is like the servant at the house and is kind of like uneducated and kind of looks at the governess as superior and like kind of does whatever she tells the Mrs. Grouse to do. She learns from Mrs. Grouse that these like two figures that she's described could be like Peter Quint and the former governess who recently, I guess, fled the house. The governess starts to like kind of try and like protect the children because she learns that this Peter Quint guy was kind of a nasty person, and it's suggested that like he may have had relations with the boy, and it gets into pretty like heavy stuff, and there's like a lot of like interpretations that the ghost said.
When did you say this was written?
It's like 1898, I believe. Damn,
that's pretty heavy subject matter for that time period.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you know, Henry James, or just it's kind of the brilliance of the story is that it's never explicit. It's very implicit. There's no, and you know, like a lot of it's like open to interpretation. But a lot of people kind of saw it as even like the governess herself is like very, you know, this is Victorian times, obviously, and like women didn't have a lot of career options except to be kind of like a governess or like a homemaker. There's been like interpretations that she, you know, is like obviously like really repressed and out of her element in this new home with these like strange people that she's never met and children that she has to care for, and she may have had like an attraction to the master of the estate, so she transfers her desire for him actually onto the boy.
So would you say this is sort of on the tail end of the Gothic literature period?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, I think like you could probably argue that the Victorian era, as far as like the home being like this sphere of domesticity where I guess like the working man or like the middle class could come back, and that was kind of like their haven from the horrors of the world as far as like, you know, the workforce and the factories and just
brutal reality, their day-to-day lives.
You know, if we're like talking about like haunted houses like that, even that personal space getting defiled or corrupted. But yeah, it's a really good story. It's kind of dense. It's a
classic.
It's definitely like one of the, you know, better ghost stories.
Yeah,
it's definitely going on my reading list. That sounds pretty heavy. It sounds right up my alley.
Well, it's definitely been interpreted on the screen at least 3 times, at least.
I mean, kind of like the big question is like whether the governess actually does see like any spirits, or if she's just like, you know, psychological breakdown that she has. I think like the film would kind of limit that interpretation. I'd definitely be interested to see a film adaptation.
Yeah, that definitely goes back to my point that haunted house films and old dark house films are often sort of a tough balance between the supernatural and the psyche and figuring out whether it's one thing or the other.
Yeah, this reminds me a little bit. Have either of you seen? It was a series. It only ran for 1 season on BBC. It was called The Living and the Dead. You familiar with it?
Mm-mm. Tell me about it.
It plays with that whole idea of, is the main character seeing these spirits or is he going crazy? But at the same time, and this is something else that I don't see very often in ghost movies or haunted house movies, This is more like a haunted plantation. This guy moves to his dead father's farm, and he's in charge of keeping it going. So he's got all of these superstitious people living there. He's kind of the lord of the land, that kind of thing. I think it's Victorian. It might be a little earlier than that, but that's neither here nor there. This series, it plays with time, too, which I don't see very often in ghost tales, I guess. It takes place mostly in this Victorian time period where the lord of the manor is seeing specters and ghosts and whatnot, but some of what he's seeing is this woman with an iPad wandering around his castle, and I don't want to give too much of it away because it's really good and really...
Did you say iPad or eye patch?
iPad. That is odd.
Yeah, it's... Oh. Yeah, this man in the Victorian era is seeing a ghost carrying around an iPad. It also jumps into the future, and you see why he's seeing this girl. You see what she's doing as well, but that's all I'm going to say about that. It was just interesting to see a ghost story play with time, but it also factors in because this guy thinks he's losing his mind, and so does his wife, so does everyone that works under him. So yeah, it's a really interesting take on the whole ghost tale, and I think it's a shame it's not going to get a season 2, but season 1 is worth a watch, and it almost ends satisfactorily. The only other thing I have, it's a little less plot-wise to the haunted house than Ghost Tale. It's more of an observation about the movies themselves. Mm-hmm. I have a list here because I was challenging myself to prove myself wrong. It seems, to me at least, there's never an okay ghost movie. They're either really good, like the first time you see The Sixth Sense, it's really good. The Conjuring's really good. Poltergeist is really good. The Devil's Backbone.
House on Haunted Hill.
Legend of Hell House. Crimson Peak. They're all excellent movies. And then on the other end of things, you have things like Stir of Echoes, The Haunting, the remake, not the original. Some of the Paranormal Activities. I know how much you love found footage. There's never any middle ground. Like, I'm sorry, I just lied to you, listeners. She doesn't like found footage. Neither do I.
Yeah, I like
found footage movies.
Can you think of a ghost movie where you were just like mad about?
I would say the remake of The Haunting.
Oh, I hated it.
It seemed like a remake of The Haunting trying to be a remake of Legend of Hell House.
That's a really good way to put it, and just failing spectacularly at both.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've seen that.
Just don't.
I saw The Haunting in the theaters. I had such high hope for it. Mm-hmm. It had Lily, what's her name, from the I Shot Andy Warhol, Lily Tomlin?
No, not Lily Tomlin.
Lily Taylor?
It had Catherine Zeta-Jones, Owen Wilson, or the other one. I'm pretty sure it was Owen.
Yeah, it was definitely Owen.
Oh,
yeah, I had high hopes because of the cast, and it completely failed me, and I was disappointed.
There were moments that were okay. I liked the moment with the fountain.
I don't remember that. Most of my brain, like, I've cleared the biological hard drive to make room for things that I actually care about at this point.
Pretty much the main thing that movie had going for it was cast and set design.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But even, and I'll bring this up when we get to my movie, but I can almost guarantee that most of that set design is green screen.
I'd have to go back to look at it, but I wouldn't argue with you there.
Yeah, and I think that that's a shame, and I think that especially haunted house movies, the house needs to be a character, and I think the only way you can do that is if you actually have physical interactions with objects in the house. But we'll come back to that.
Would we like to tackle some horror news before we move on to our movies for the week?
Yeah, I do have one piece of horror news. I don't know if you guys have anything, but I would definitely like to speak of mine.
Go ahead.
And now that I did that, I feel like a complete asshole because my bit of news is a little bit heavy. So Jeepers Creepers 3 is coming to Netflix February 24th, which is, I mean, this movie has been full of controversy since everybody found out it was going to be made, because Victor Salva is a convicted child molester. He was convicted of sexually assaulting a child while on the set of a movie in the 90s.
Oh, would that be Funhouse,
apparently, it might have been Funhouse, I don't remember.
House?
But he filmed this assault, and they also found him with a bunch of child porn, too. I had seen both Jeepers Creepers 1 and 2, which he also directed. I know how I feel about this. The man's a monster, and he doesn't deserve the money he's getting from these movies. So I'm torn between watching it on Netflix, which I doubt I'll do. I found myself in this situation with Roman Polanski as well. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think it's important to note that this movie is coming out on Netflix, and this man is a monster, and he's done some terrible things. Listeners, do what you want. Watch the movie or don't, but just know who you may or may not be supporting if you do.
It's a tough battle to separate the art from the artist.
It is, and sometimes I think that's okay. Like, I think I can separate...
Dennis Rodman's excellent basketball skills from his... best frienditude with Kim Jong-un.
Right, because I'm a huge basketball fan, so that's a problem for me.
he was a good player, right? I've never actually seen... I saw him wear a wedding dress. That's about the extent of what I know about him.
Yeah, he played basketball matches fine, from what I understand. I don't know, better example might be Jackson Pollock, the fact that he was just a wife-beating alcoholic jerk. Same with Charles Bukowski. I enjoy some of Pollock's art, and I enjoy all of Charles Bukowski's writings.
Bing Crosby?
But they're both terrible people as well. Bing Crosby, yeah. And people are going to argue, stuff like that, people always argue it was the time, things were treated differently then, but I don't think that's actually an excuse. Mm-mm. I think especially now when all this stuff in Hollywood about all these sexual assaults...
Especially on children.
Stories, yeah, especially on children. But all these sexual assaults are finally coming to light. Mm-hmm. I think now's the time we have to start speaking with our wallets and taking a stand. Yeah, not supporting these filmmakers. Again, I'm not telling anyone what to do, but I'm pretty sure I will not be supporting this film.
I can happily say I never enjoyed the Jeepers Creepers movies anyway.
I thought they did some interesting things. I thought the first one wasn't bad, but that's the other thing. You go back, you go back and think about these movies. There is a whole lot of sexualization of teenage characters in his film, and knowing what he did and knowing that he was still making movies that was doing that is terrifying. Hollywood truly is just this completely different world that I'll never understand as a small town hillbilly weirdo, I guess.
Yeah, we're not evolved enough to understand people like that, and I'm perfectly happy not to be.
Yeah, me too. I'm very happy living in my progressive little bubble where I try to be okay to everybody I can.
I've got a little bit of lighter news before we move on to the movies. Fangoria.
Yeah, lighter news is probably good.
Yeah, Fangoria has apparently been bought out by a Texas-based company, so they may be getting print issues again. I've never been a regular subscriber, but if it means keeping Fangoria alive, I might consider investing in that in the future.
I was always more of a Rue Morgue guy myself. I think that Fangoria, I think there were some backdoor deals with production companies in Fangoria. I don't have any proof of this, obviously. It's just some rumors I've heard and some feelings based on some of the things I've read in their mag. But I feel like they maybe have taken some gifts to write some more positive articles than they would have otherwise. And I always found Rue Morgue to be a little more objective and fair in their covering of horror. But at the same time, I am completely of the mind that print media is dead, and I wonder how long this will last if they do start making print copies of it.
It depends on if they can earn back their fan base or not, because a lot of people felt pretty betrayed when they just suddenly shut down like that.
Yeah, that's true. And the rumors about them getting paid for reviews started somewhere towards the end as well, and I think they started bleeding fans there too.
Yeah, well, it's up movies nobody liked, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I think Rue Morgue took up a lot of their fan base as well, because Rue Morgue was just better written.
Starting off, let's get into the movies. I picked a more modern feature this time around. We Are Still Here from 2015.
Wasn't long after that the trouble began. Old Dagmar had been running the bar no more than a couple of months when word got out that they were selling the bodies and burying empty coffins. People were saying he was selling the corpses to the university over in Essex County. Some even said he was selling to the Orientals over in Boston, turning them into chop suey. The town ran him, his wife, and the little girl out on a rail. It was just the saddest thing. They moved to Providence, but his family just couldn't stand the sight of him. Old Dagmar drank himself to death no more than a year later. They say he was no more than a shell of a man at the end.
The director and co-writer Ted, and I know I'm going to butcher his name, Ted Geoghegan. Ted Geoghegan. Ted Gagan. That makes sense. Yeah. This was his first feature film. It looks like, from what I could find, he works primarily with independent stuff. And the music was written or composed by, and this is another name I'm going to probably have trouble pronouncing, Wojciech Golczewski. And then the producer was Travis Stevens. My first thought on this, of course, is because You know, the ending is on this movie, and I'm not going to spoil it because it's only a few years old, but the ending of this movie is so ambiguous that I went to look for some discussions and reviews and opinions on it. Because I've always found that to flesh out a film, sometimes it's easier for me to see other people's thoughts. And it used to be so easy to just find that information on IMDb because there'd always be 20 different conversations about it. And I'd be like, oh yeah, and have a light bulb moment. Shame on IMDb.
Killed their message boards, the bastards.
They killed their whole user base. The slow build in this movie really reminded me of like Black Coat's Daughter. If either of y'all have seen that.
That's been on my list for a month of Sundays, and I just haven't gotten around to it yet.
Yeah, I think it takes like a good 10 or 15 minutes for there to be any dialogue. If that's a good indicator for y'all of how.
That's a very good indicator, and a very good that makes me want to watch it tonight. I love movies that spend time setting things up by sight and sound rather than dialogue.
The film is set in the 70s, and they don't ever really give you a clear reason why.
I love that it's in the 70s just because it kind of eliminates the problems that a lot of kind of modern movies have with modern technologies like cell phones and
cell phones would have completely ruined this movie.
It's funny y'all say that because the director was actually talking about how much cell phones have ruined modern horror. They've taken a lot of the fun out of it. I remember the first time I saw it really being used in the Fright Night remake when Charlie Brewster was looking up how to pick a lock while he was standing outside the door in the dumbest way possible in big letters and everything right on the screen. And it was, oh, thanks iPhone for advertising your company so conveniently. Anyway, back to the film. It kind of, like, the style really reflects what a lot of the smaller niches of independent horror is doing right now. Just the style, the color, the music, everything about it, even the writing.
The house was built in, like, I think the same year that the house was built in the movie, like in the 1850s. And a lot of, like, the set decorations, set design, that the props that they used in the movie were found in, like, thrift stores and, like, donated by the people in the nearby town. And I think, like, even, like, the cars that they used in the movie were rented cars from the townspeople. So it's really cool that the locals like helped to make the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's awesome, and that it makes me feel even better that giant chunk of wood on the porch was sourced locally. I really like that set piece for some reason. They didn't touch it at all. There was just this giant piece of tree sitting on the porch the entire movie, and I just thought it was beautiful, and it always pulled my attention.
Historically accurate films that are like spot on every detail, it's really tough to find. Even if you look at older movies from the 70s, 60s, 80s, whatever, there's always little glaring obvious errors with the clothing or the structure of the house. So I can definitely appreciate that they got an actual period house to stage this in. It felt like something new, and yet at the same time a really elegant return to form for the genre. Very, very simple story. And also, I really love curses. I love when a house is haunted because of some great tragedy or injustice. When there's a deep hidden secret the victims in the story aren't immediately aware of. Pretty much, actually, all three films we discussed today are kind of like that. Most haunted old dark house pictures seem to follow that kind of rule.
Yeah, there's a lot of homages in this movie, like the ball falling down the basement stairs from The Changeling, and even like you could probably throw Lovecraft in there too, with like the Dagmars selling the bodies to like universities and like burying like empty coffins, kind of like how like Reanimator is with Miskatonic University. You know, this like evil entity that's underneath the house that demands a sacrifice every 30 years.
Yeah, that's what I found very Eldritch Horror about the whole thing, was the fact that these ghosts aren't necessarily there because they want to do what they're doing. There's another power that we never see or understand controlling them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, the basic gist of the story is it's the 1970s, a couple named Anne, played by Barbara Crampton, who y'all might actually remember from Reanimator. She was the blonde bombshell in Chopping Mall. She was in Puppet Master, Castle Freaks, like so many of my favorite 80s B movies. And then there's Paul, played by Andrew Sensenig, who's like just mostly a TV actor from what I could find. And they move into this house in the country after losing their son in a car accident. Another fairly common element in these stories, too, think Country Mouse and City Mouse. Not only adjusting to a new environment, but an evil one at that. So soon after they move in, Anne begins to think their son's ghost is in the house. And the family who built the place, the Dagmars, were run out of the home, which was formerly a funeral parlor. Anne and Paul decide to contact their friends, who just so happen to be psychics, May and Jacob, played by Larry Fessenden and Lisa Marie.
I was so confused about why those two would be friends, why those two nerdy husband and wife couple, like they're just totally square, would be friends with someone as cool as the psychic. I'm sure you're going to get to why, but for a decent chunk of the movie, like, why are these people friends?
They I think they grew up together, actually. So that could be a...
No, they were friends because of their dead son's roommate. It was the dead son's roommate's parents, wasn't it?
Well, you just solved that mystery on your own.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you got that.
Oh, no, I didn't. But they just kind of appeared out of nowhere for me, and I never focused on their story.
Oh, okay. I did because I had just found the dad to be so nerdy. I just couldn't figure out why these people wanted to hang out with him. And that was why they were kind of forced to.
Yeah, he was a very dry kind of person. I didn't even understand why his wife was with him, but I'm going to blame it on the morning. Anyway, these two hippies are like the most normal people in the whole story anyway. The two main characters are too boring to be real, and everyone in the town is, of course, like freaky.
Valid point.
Mm-hmm. The hippies, Larry Fessenden. So good at possession. And he got to actually have teeth in a movie for once. He never has teeth in his movies.
It's true.
That was my favorite scene, was the possession scene.
Oh, yeah, when he ate the sock.
Yeah, but...
Yeah.
Oh, the moral of that story is never have a seance without the one who's an expert in seances, man. Just don't do it.
Or at least don't do it with socks in the room.
Yeah.
Right.
I thought Larry actually kind of resembles a much less attractive, older Clayton Rohner.
I don't know who that is.
Yeah, he was like an 80s actor. He was in like April Fool's Day and other movies. Pretty sure he was in Good vs. Evil too. Larry is the definition of a prolific actor and director. He has done a lot. Anyway, things don't go well for the family, and when the truth behind the house is revealed, things just get worse. Again, since this is a newer movie, I'd rather not go into spoilers, but I'm sure plenty of people probably see where it's going. It's very simple, cut and dry, yet even so it feels very fresh. It also feels very off-pace and unreal. I'm kind of reminded of the dream sequence in Carrie when Sue was walking towards Carrie's grave. That shot was captured by filming her walking backwards and then reversing the sequence. And this whole movie almost kind of felt like that.
I'm not sure if I would say it's dreamlike, but I mean, there's definitely, like, they reverse a lot of tropes in this movie. You know, the general trope with, like, ghosts is that, you know, the room gets really cold and you can see your breath, and they kind of reverse that with being, like, very hot and you can smell smoke. Yeah, I mean, like you said, it was very, like, slow-paced. I really did like the nods to other horror movies, like even like Nightmare on Elm Street, when one of the townspeople is, like, trying to go up the stairs, and I think they used mashed potatoes and they, like, molded the stairs and made it the same color as the stair material, so like when the guy stepped on it, his foot went through it. Just a really good, like, ghost story. I love the makeup effects with the ghosts. I like that they like attack in the daylight, and it's like you can get away from the house. Like one of the ghosts, like, don't really have any fear of daylight. Like, they'll come and get you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the seance, like you said, the seance is during the day.
The scene you're referencing, David, when the son's girlfriend gets out of the house and drives away. Yeah, there was actually, I don't know if I'm just reading into it, but I think there was a really clever misdirect there. There's kind of a joke where anytime you see someone driving a Dodge Dart, chances are it's going to explode later on. So as soon as they, like, focused on the Dart logo, I'm like, okay, she's going to wreck this car for whatever reason, and that's going to be it. But that wasn't the case at all. I just thought it was a really cool, simple little misdirect that they pulled. I really liked that.
I'm not sure I've ever read that much into it. I never noticed car models, but if they did, that's very clever.
Yeah, Dodge Darts were known back in the day. They had a flaw in them where rear impacts would very often expose the gas tank and they would explode.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and it was a movie joke for years. There's an old Val Kilmer comedy, I think, where they touch on it. I forget which one, but yep. Dodge Darts exploding is pretty pervasive in movies.
I like this movie altogether. You know, when I first watched it, I thought it was pretty simple, cut and dry. It didn't need to get complicated. You find yourself trying to, you know, pull out hidden meanings, multiple sides, and all that, but in the end, you're just surprised by kind of how simple the story really is.
Yeah, I think I definitely liked it too. I mean, I had a few issues with it. I think they weren't quite as clear with some of the backstory as they could have been. We've already mentioned the Dagmars selling corpses, but what I didn't really understand is, since the entire town is in on it, were they really selling corpses, or were the Dagmars just one in a long line of sacrifices, and their corpse selling story was just a cover-up to explain the weirdness of the house until it goes fully.
I think it was the latter too, and also in the end they kind of give you news articles and stuff to kind of clear that up, and the director even expressed is that the reason they put that in the end is because they didn't want to spoon feed everything, all the plot elements to the audience.
Yeah, and I really liked that too, but the problem was, by the time I got to that movie last night, I was so drunk that I couldn't read those parts very well, so I missed a lot of it.
So you felt it was too ambiguous?
Well, I mean, now that I know that had I been paying more attention, maybe that's not how I feel. I don't know, though.
Yeah, I think it was a cover-up. And I will say, I would not want to go to that priest's services. Oh my God, talk about the world's most evil Catholic priest.
Oh, for sure.
So that's We Are Still Here. I'd like to play a quick sequence from the possession scene, or the awkward stumble into it as Larry Fessenden goes from trying to explain why he said a bunch of creepy shit before he goes like crazy.
Tie me up, man. Tie me up.
This house welcomes his spirit and asks him to join us. And with love and compassion, we will help him cross to the next realm and peel the skin off his bones.
What did you say?
Moving forward, I think it's time that we hop on to David's film, the classic 1980s, would you say Ghost Adventure?
Yeah, I think that's kind of fair. I love this movie. It's definitely kind of like one of the greatest movies ever. This movie holds a special place in my... Yeah, it's awesome. This movie kind of holds a special place in my heart. It was the first movie that I distinctly remember kind of sitting down with my parents and brothers to watch all together. We had rented Poltergeist and Creepshow to watch on Halloween Eve, and it was kind of a big event because we had recently moved out of like an apartment we were living in North Austin and moved into the kind of like my mom and dad's dream house. And my mom made popcorn and snacks and told my brothers and me like when the scary parts would come, she would let us know and she would like cover our eyes. I remember like not going to the school the next day because I just could not sleep after watching this movie. I don't even think like I really went trick or treating either because I was just like so tired and didn't like had to sleep during the daytime. So the fact that we had kind of moved in this new house, and I also had one of those horrifying looking clown dolls, and my grandma had sewn me, and that didn't help anything. So
dude,
this movie
I don't mean to jump in here, but we're on the clowns. In my notes repeatedly I have that fucking clown over and over again in my notes every time it's showed up. When I was a kid, I won't take your time too long, but since we're on clowns, when I was a kid, my brother and I shared a room, and on the wall of this room there was this insane painting of a clown. It was a bunch of clowns leaning over a toy box. And inside this toy box, there was the transparent face of another ghost clown. And I lived with this thing my entire childhood, and I was terrified of it, and the eyes would follow me, and sometimes I couldn't sleep. Now that I am who I am, I wish I had that painting hanging in my room, but if my parents got rid of it years ago. But yeah, that clown, man. Oh, that clown.
I know exactly how you feel, because I had a painting in my room when I was a kid of like Minnie Mouse and Mickey Mouse and like Donald Duck, and they were eating cake, and that was scary.
Oh, I bet it was, man. Those old paintings can be terrifying.
Oh, I was just asking if the painting had been like black and white or if it had been in color.
My painting was in full, terrifying, monstrous color. Oh, my lord.
There was so much pink in mine. So much pink.
Yeah, I'll never understand what's the reasoning behind clowns and thinking they're... It's just like it just seems to be like a really like common thing that seems like a lot of like people I knew had clown dolls or clown paintings. Or
I might have a few porcelain clowns packed away with all my porcelain dolls in my parents' garage.
Yeah, we always had a lot of porcelain dolls in my house. It was
my grandmother had an entire shelf surrounding her room with porcelain dolls. It was horrifying.
I did too until I was 17.
Oh, how did you live?
I named them and gave them stories.
That's something. We should really touch upon childhood fears at some point, just so we don't derail David any longer. But I really want to revisit this. I really want to revisit this at some point.
Yeah, I definitely think that was the worst. Who thought it was a good idea to watch Poltergeist when you were that age and you were in a new house with a clown doll in your room?
I don't know. My parents were, I don't know, they had like evil machinations or something. I don't know. Yeah. So I mean, this movie just it really does like it terrified me, but it's definitely like it's a part of me. This movie hooks you in right away. You're drawn in by this family, the Freelings, combating this supernatural occurrence. Like pretty early in the movie, you're kind of like hit with that national anthem in the beginning. What's kind of fun about this movie is that it has like a very like playful and comedic elements in a lot of parts, especially like even like with the hauntings with the chairs moving around or the lights going out and turning back on, and the chairs being stacked under the dining table, which is I still think is just an amazing just great scene.
Yeah, with all that humor and all the back and forth between the family, it made it really feel like it was an actual family. They did the whole, even from the beginning with that long shot of like suburban utopia and then the banter within the family. I think that's what makes the second half of the movie so effective, is that they painted these people to be like this typical American family. I thought it was really great.
Yeah, and I think it was a very wise choice just to cast like relatively unknown actors. You have Craig T. Nelson playing the dad, Steven, Jo Beth Williams, who's amazing in this movie. Like Diane really is kind of like the heroine in this movie. And you have like Dominique Dunn playing Dana, the daughter, Oliver Robbins playing Robbie, Heather O'Rourke just amazing in this movie as Carol Ann, and of course Zelda Rubinstein as Tangina. But yeah, I mean it definitely feels kind of like almost like a documentary and then feel to it, the movie, as far as like you're just kind of sitting here and you feel like kind of like a part of the family.
I actually would like to say I think it would be a crime not to mention Zelda Rubinstein's incredible work in Teen Witch.
I never saw Teen Witch.
It's got the greatest rap of all time, David.
You're damn right it's got the greatest rap.
You've got to at least find the rap. And one of the grossest makeout scenes I've ever seen, too.
Actually,
but that's
let's
either
put this on
there.
hold real quick, and let's make David watch Top That.
I think that is an excellent idea. I watched it a lot, too, but the scene when the Teen Witch finally kills the boy, kisses. Wow, I can't believe I got those words confused. There's something wrong with me.
Which one's the witch?
The redhead. Yeah, but now that you understand the context of that joke, David.
Well, where was Zelda Rubinstein?
Oh, you want Zelda Rubinstein? She plays the elder witch in this movie who teaches the redhead about life.
Yeah, when the redhead finally kisses the boy she wants to kiss, it's the grossest use of tongue I have ever seen in a kissing scene. I encourage you to go back and watch it now that you're older and just see how gross this dude. They're just, it's disgusting.
It might be fun to do commentary on Teen Witch someday.
Oh, I'd be down.
All right, anyway, stars Zelda Rubinstein. Go on.
This movie kind of has like those comedic elements. You also get this gradually more malicious and malevolent presence that kind of like builds in the film. Of course, you kind of learn more about the lore of that in the sequel, Poltergeist 2, The Other Side, who's kind of referred to like as the Beast in this movie. You learn more about this character of like Reverend Henry Kane, who's played by Julian Beck, and I think it's a really amazing performance. Like I wanted to watch Poltergeist 2 again, but unfortunately, like I've been like really busy. I didn't have like a lot of time. He was apparently like dying of stomach cancer during this performance, and he does an amazing job playing this Henry Kane character, and he's still like, I mean, just seeing Henry Kane in the movie it still like freaks me out. Just a really like kind of underrated villain.
He was terrifying. Just looking at him was scary. According to something I read briefly when I try not to research you guys' stuff too much. I came across something that said that the Beast, and you may have already mentioned this and I had just missed it on the Teen Witch thing or forgotten, but the Beast was actually supposed to be hinting at him later, and I don't know if that's actually true. But
I've never heard of that.
Yeah, the big, tall, lanky ghost thing.
Yeah, with like the
is
long
supposed
white hair
to be him. Yeah, that's
and like the skull that comes out of the closet.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure y'all are aware that this was the story of this being ghost directed by Spielberg, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the big controversy, and I mean I don't even know if it's really still a controversy anymore, since like so many cast members have kind of come forward and said that Tobe Hooper was kind of a mess and like kind of out of his element during the production of the movie, and
I feel like that's going a little too far to say that about Toby.
I'm just saying that he, like, according to Zelda Rubinstein, he was had a substance abuse problem like during the film. Like he had to enter apparently like he entered rehab like after shortly. filming was done.
And as I've said before, Tobe Hooper is really hit or miss. He's not necessarily a good director, and if he finds stuff he just can't touch, he may be more specialized than we think, but if he finds stuff he just can't do, like, I can totally imagine him being in over his head.
Well, I certainly take umbrage at him not being a good director. But I will say that, you see a lot of Spielberg's hand in this whole picture. There are very few moments that feel like Tobe. And I would say one of them is the elements with the ghosts and the floating bodies. Yeah. And the other part is when the man peels off his face in the mirror. That is so totally Tobe Hooper right there.
Oh, yeah. And the sound effects for that were so perfectly disgusting, too. And for the record, I just want to clarify, I don't think Tobe Hooper's a bad director. I think Tobe Hooper is a situationally bad director. I think that he's done a lot of great stuff, but I think that he's done some pretty awful stuff too.
I'll get on board with you at that. It's funny though, the clown didn't give me nightmares as a kid, but that mirror scene did.
Yeah,
those were Spielberg's hands too, by the way.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, but definitely, with the bodies eventually coming out of the water, it definitely kind of brought me back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre with the desecrated cemetery and that like grotesque kind of statue that's made.
And as we mentioned in an earlier episode, that some of those were real bodies.
Yep. Yeah, we'll get to that. But so you've definitely kind of like, you feel like a family member with the Freelings, and when you see like that spectral hand come out of the TV and you hear the absolutely amazing music by Jerry Goldsmith, like his. I think he was a nominee for an Academy Award, and sadly this film was actually nominated for an Academy Award for several categories and lost to Spielberg's E.T., which was released the same year.
I'm sure Spielberg didn't mind.
Yeah, he wins in the end, I guess. Cause, apparently, like, he that was kind of like the big thing too, is like he was, like he had obviously like produced and written this movie, and I guess like delays when E.T. was filming had him on the set a lot, and so the only reason really like that he didn't take the directorial chairs because he had like I guess like a clause in his contract from Universal Studios that he couldn't direct another movie at the same time. But I think Tobe Hooper was actually offered E.T. to direct, and he turned it down in favor of Poltergeist.
I feel like Spielberg is the ultimate perfectionist when it comes to great directors.
And he's like, this is ultimately like a family movie, and he does that really well. Obviously, like, as we've seen, like in E.T. and other movies, we get that, like the amazing music by Jerry Goldsmith, and the spectral hand kind of comes out of the TV and plunges into the wall above where like the family is all in bed together because the kids were afraid of the storm that's been raging. You're just filled with this sense of dread about what this family is going to come to face. Apparently, like the film script was originally intended to be much darker than it is, and Carol Ann actually, like in the original script, dies within the first act of the movie.
Oh my gosh!
And Spielberg did not want to get the R rating for the movie, so he managed to have the film changed to a PG rating with changes, of course, to the movie and like an appeal. But of course, like this movie still scared the hell out of me, and I'm sure it scared you guys too. The practical effects in this movie are just brilliant. The tree, the skull that comes out of the closet, the beast, the portal to the other side that happens at the end of the movie is just amazing.
I think there is one effect that falls flat today.
I mean, the face looks kind of old.
I actually wasn't referring to that. I was referring to more when the things started flying around the bedroom.
Oh yeah. When that like paranormal investigators kind of superimposed, and that does look kind of cheesy, but
and I thought the choice to have the protractor play the record was a bad choice as well.
Oh yeah,
that's not believable.
Not that I need it to be realistic, but I need it to at least be plausible sometimes on a movie that's supposed to be a little serious. Yeah.
You can't play music with a compass.
You're right. I suppose I'm nerding out a little bit there.
But yeah, Industrial Light and Magic just did a wonderful job, and when things finally kick off with Carol Ann being sucked into the closet and trapped in this realm that we learn is like the other side, I don't think really even like the best CGI could capture the pure horror on Carol Ann's face as she's like losing the grip on her bed and flying into this closet and disappearing and trapped off from her parents. And that was kind of like my big problem, I guess, with the remake, and we don't have to really go into it. There's I really don't think there's that many practical effects in the new remake.
Was Poltergeist?
There was probably none.
Was Poltergeist inspired by the old Twilight Zone episode? Do you know which one I'm talking about?
No.
There's an episode where basically they lose their little girl and they hear her calling out to them, and they figure out she's gone through a portal in her bedroom, and they draw a sort of doorway around it, and they have to go inside and rescue her.
Oh, with chalk or something? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, I seem to remember that. No, yeah, I that totally escaped my mind. I didn't. But yeah, I mean, that definitely could have. I don't know. It's like people get ideas for stories from anywhere, but yeah, I mean, that's definitely I totally forgot about that. That's a good point. Just a quick note, I guess, like Heather O'Rourke, who plays Carol Ann, was so terrified by the sequence and the wind machine that they used that Spielberg promised her that she would only have to do like one take for this movie, and I guess like after she was like done with the scene, like she came running and you like had to hold her because like it was just so terrifying. So yeah, that horror that you see on her face in that scene is pretty genuine, and it's just an amazing effects sequence with her like flying into the closet. Of course, we learn over the course of the movie that the house and neighborhood is built over this cemetery because the urban planners, those bastards, had moved the headstones but not the bodies.
It's always the damn urban planners.
I know.
We're ruining this country.
So, there's these restless spirits that are still there. One of my favorite sequences in the film is actually when the cameras of the paranormal investigators who have been invited into the house to try and, find Carol Ann are filming and the family's asleep, and you see these orbs of light and beautiful light sphere descending the staircase, and you get again that amazing score by Goldsmith. And on the camera playback you can see that there are actually these orbs or people. They're kind of wearing this 19th century attire with their coats and hats. And the sequel will go on to explain the history of these spirits and how they were kind of tricked by this Reverend Kane character to die in this cave underneath the house, and that kind of explains the more malevolent side of the haunting or the Poltergeist.
I gotta admit, you're kind of inspiring me right now to want to just power through the trilogy.
I'm probably gonna do that tonight.
Third one's kind of hard sit, but yeah, the second one, I would definitely recommend the second one. But yeah, like I said, I should watch it again because the second one actually is pretty awesome.
Of course, the main moral of this story is that the other side is very gooey.
Yeah, very gooey.
Since we're talking about the sequel, I'm having this little Mandela effect situation going on, and it might actually be just me confusing it for the sequel. So I distinctly remember the dad getting drunk and going up to the mirror like the paranormal investigator, and then his face melting off.
Well,
did that actually happen?
If I remember correctly, he drinks this mezcal.
Mezcal.
And he ingests this worm that's just possessed by Kane.
Oh, that's definitely mezcal.
Yeah, he's possessed, and he tries to attack Diane, and he eventually retches up the worm and turns into this weird tentacle monster. It's pretty gross.
Okay, but, so that happens in the sequel then, and I'm not just crazy or I haven't swapped realities again. Okay.
We eventually get Tangina coming into the picture with played by Zelda Rubinstein. She's the psychic trying to help the family find Carol Ann. She eventually turns up and confronts the entities, and we've said before that Diane, played by Jo Beth Williams, she really is
she's kick-ass.
Yeah, she holds this family together. She holds the movie together. She's just awesome, and she really is the heroine for this movie. And you get this epic sequence where she goes into the closet to find Carol Ann, and they're using these tennis balls and the rope, and it's just a phenomenal sequence. And I even like the sequence where Tangina goes into the children's room, and you get these otherworldly lights that are moving around, which I believe they just used aquariums filled with water and used a wind machine to move the water, and they had strobe lights filter through the water.
It's amazing how incredible incredibly creative physical effects can get, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's just very simple and it's just really effective. And you get like a really great like comedy bit where Tangina says, you know, she's going to the closet to get Carol Ann, and Diane says, you know, she won't come to you, let me go. And Tangina says, you've never done this before. To which Diane replies, neither of you. And Tangina just stares at her and she's like, you're right, you go. And I tried to find that clip.
That was one of my favorite moments in the
like
entire movie.
I love it.
She's
like, oh, holy crap, I could die or get lost in hell. Yeah, I'm not doing that.
Yeah. So, I mean, she really, and like, there's in the remake, there's kind of like the paranormal expert that they reach out to. He's played by this British actor. I like this actor, and forgive me, I didn't look up his name, or I can't recollect his name, but I really liked him in Mad Men. He plays kind of like the advertising executive that comes over from England, but he's like the paranormal expert in the movie, and yeah, he just doesn't really compare to Tangina.
Yeah, his name for the record is Jared Harris, and I actually have in my notes, let me see if I can find it here real quick, sorry. Oh, okay, here it is. I have in my notes, love the tiny psychic, but I'm sure she'll be butchered in the remake. And I was right.
Yeah, and just like the little girl in the remake just doesn't really compare to Heather O'Rourke. Yeah, we finally kind of breathe a sigh of relief as like Diane and Carol Ann come back to the other side and is resuscitated in the bathtub full of water.
Covered in goo.
Yeah, covered in nasty goo. And Tangina proclaims that...
This house is clean.
And she's full of it.
There's like a whole 30-minute battle sequence that we have to go through, and it's like, what the hell, Tangina? What were you thinking? I guess like Kane must have buried himself in a lead cave or something, and I'm sure we'll get to that with Corey's movie. I don't know how she didn't. I don't know. Like, I guess Tangina just doesn't. He was like hiding or something, and like she totally didn't pick up on his like signal. Or
I think the limitation is that even if she's a psychic, she's still human.
Well, I mean, like Kane was too, but yeah, it's like he must have been like super. I mean, he was evil, but he must have been like a really bad guy to have like that much power after death. But
he kind of.
I mean, if you look at it, if you consider spiritual energy as a measurable thing, which a lot of parapsychologists do and paranormal investigators do, it could be a case of him either changing frequencies or his sort of spirit radius, just because it's shown in the sequels that he doesn't have to be there, right?
Or
so he could have just like pieced out.
He was like a powerful psychic too, maybe.
Could be.
Because that's what they kind of allude to with like Carol Ann and Diane in the sequel too, is that they're they're powerful clairvoyants, and so like they have kind of like psychic potential abilities.
Or some serious retconning.
That's what I'm feeling.
That was kind of like one of the cool parts in this movie, though, is like especially like that staircase scene, is that they kind of do like, honestly, like I should have looked it up. Like I don't know when the script for the sequel was written, but I do love that when you're seeing these spirits walk down the house, that there is like that 19th century look about the spirits. So that kind of explains like these souls really are kind of like the flock, or this cult really, that, you know, the Reverend Kane tricked and like caused them to die, because he basically had this idea that the end of the world was coming on this certain day, and the day passed and like nothing happened. So he was like,
I really like that. You need to get to work on a prequel script right now, while I get to work on a fan fiction pairing Zelda Rubinstein with the
You know, if we keep talking about fan fictions and prequel and stuff, we're going to have to actually start writing this, and that's going to give us even less time.
That'll give us a very exciting podcast episode in the future. We'll pick our best fan fiction ideas, and we'll read them aloud. We'll reenact.
Let's wait till summer for that, so I have time.
Tangina is like so damn wrong, and they come back with a vengeance, and they're pissed. Carol Ann, Carol Ann's been taken away, and it's kind of we won't listen to the monologue that Tangina has, but she explains it to like that this like presence with her, which we, I guess we assume that's Kane as the later movies kind of unfold. It's this presence that like tricks Carol Ann to like stay with it because it acts like a child, and it is really like frightening, especially because like you never see really this presence. You just see like, the skull and that lanky, apparition that Corey was talking about before with like the long white hair, and it really is like really disturbing that this thing is trying to trick Carol Ann.
I've always found that to be one of the most disturbing tropes: a demon or a ghost deceiving a small child, or deceiving someone into thinking it's a small child. That one's pretty freaky too.
Yeah.
But the whole deceiving small child trope is is really interesting to me because it gets into the whole children are unspoiled and they have this different connection to spirituality because of their innocence and the fact that they haven't had all that stuff trained out of them yet. There is still magic for kids because we haven't taught them there isn't anymore.
Well, and they're also the vulnerability of the other people in the home. If you get to their child, you can get to them easily.
But yeah, so we get kind of a horrifying finale with like the dead and their coffins bursting out of their graves, and we have like Diane like desperately trying to get help from the neighbors and calling out to them, and she falls in the swimming pool. And this scene here is like she falls into the swimming pool and trying to get out, and of course it's storming and she can't get out easily with like the mud, and this pool is just filled with skeletons, and you're like, wow, these are some really awesome effects. And no, it's not special effects. Like, these are real damn skeletons, as like Corey pointed out before. And JoBeth Williams, who is unaware of this fact, apparently, like while she was filming the scene, and she only found out about it after the scene was shot. But she originally didn't want to get in the pool simply because like she was scared of like being electrocuted because of like the equipment and the lights and everything. And Spielberg actually had to get in the water with her just to get this thing shot and, reassure her that, she wasn't going to be electrocuted and die. Of course, this has led to one of the famous, people associate the Poltergeist film curse, the famous, film curse of all time, where, several actors, unfortunately, met untimely deaths during the course of the 3 films. Dominique Dunne, who played the daughter Dana, was tragically murdered by her boyfriend the same year that the film was released.
I forgot about that.
Yeah.
And Heather O'Rourke, of course.
Yeah, I guess, she was, I think she was strangled the day before Halloween.
Oh my.
Yeah, and so she went into a coma for 6 days, and then she passed away. But
that's horrible.
Wait, we're talking about the older sister, right?
Yeah, the older
sister.
Dana,
yeah. She I think that was her only film role too. But yeah, it's really sad. And Rubenstein claims that she saw her dog on set shortly before receiving a phone call from her mother telling her that the dog had died. JoBeth Williams claimed that when she would come home from filming, the pictures on the wall of her house were always crooked. She had to straighten them. And of course, Heather O'Rourke, sadly, who's amazing in this movie, actually got the role for Carol Ann over Drew Barrymore because, Spielberg apparently wanted someone more angelic. So, and, of course, Drew Barrymore was also on E.T. But she passed away after Poltergeist 3 after doctors apparently failed to diagnose an intestinal ailment that she had. So she would actually be buried in the same cemetery as Dominique Dunne. But it's just very sad,
I wonder if Heather O'Rourke might not have died had she not taken the phrase "go into the light" to heart.
That is such a terrible joke, Corey. You're going to hell. Unfortunately, it was a misdiagnosis.
Yeah.
I had thought it had something to do with Tylenol for some reason. It was an allergic reaction to Tylenol, but I guess not.
No, it was kind of believed that she died of influenza, but then later on it was announced that they had to repair an acute bowel obstruction. Originally, they had diagnosed her with Crohn's disease. Septic shock ultimately killed her.
Oh, that sucks.
She
was, seriously, and she was so good too. That's even more tragic. That whole the scene, the parakeet funeral. That was the most adorable funeral I've ever seen. She was so cute through that whole thing, giving the bird the licorice and the blanket, and then just immediately doing the kid thing and be like, "Can we get a goldfish?" It was perfect.
It seems like there are a lot of stories related to the darker sort of classic ghost films, demon films, possession films about curses.
Yeah, it's all over The Exorcist too, which I'm sure we'll cover down the road.
The end of this movie has you on the edge of your seat. As the house is getting sucked into the void and families trying to make it out together and drive to the hotel, and you get that final kind of comedic moment where Steven wheels the TV out of the hotel room.
I love that moment.
And it's just an amazing ending, and you just feel so relieved.
That might be one of my and the parakeet funeral and the TV rolling out of the hotel room might be my 2 favorite scenes in that film. They were just so well done.
It's such an iconic movie.
Yeah, I mean, this movie is a classic, and for me it's one of the greatest movies ever. But
yeah. I would argue it's a perfect film. I mean, it's one of the rare films that if you take away all the horror, which I wouldn't want to do, of course, but if you take away all the horror and just have this be a comedy drama about a family just doing their thing, it would still be a good movie.
Yeah, you've got,
you know what I mean?
Still got great bones.
Yeah, I can't think of any complaints I have with the original Poltergeist. It was pretty great.
Well, I guess, any final thoughts, David?
No, that's all I got. But yeah, I just love that movie.
Great movie.
So one thing I really liked about this movie was that there are these tiny throwaway lines that hint to other stories that really open up the world for this film. An example of this would be at one point, what's the wife's name again? I'm sorry.
Diane.
Diane. At one point, Diane says to Stephen, her husband, she says, "Reach back into your past when you used to have an open mind." At face value, that line is just her kind of jabbing at her husband for comedy. But if you take it and you apply it to the scene where she's smoking pot in the bedroom and wasting all that weed, like there's weed all over the foot of the bed. I don't know if you guys noticed that.
Yeah, like Stephen's really bad at rolling.
Yeah, Stephen can't roll joints. But that hints at the fact that Stephen was a lot more like open-minded and probably more progressive and hippie-ish back in the day. He was a little more like his wife. And in that bedroom scene when she's smoking pot, he's reading a book about Ronald Reagan. So it hints at the fact that he used to be this like hippie dude who's kind of gone square, and he's got this job in real estate. And
he's like the definition of a classic yuppie.
Right, exactly. They open up the world there. And at the end, when they're talking about staying at the hotel, the daughter's like, "Oh, I know that place." Totally hinting that she's been like taking boys there or seeing boys throughout the movie, which you also see a hickey on her neck when she comes back at the end of it too. I just love the little bits that I love little bits that open the movie's world up a little bit. And this is another reason why this is such a good movie.
They very effectively craft these human characters.
God, definitely. They're very human, and you just don't see that all the time. More often than not, they're caricatures.
All right. And on that note, speaking of caricatures, let's talk about your movie, Corey, Legend of Hill House.
Actually, can I say one more thing about Poltergeist in the remake part of it?
Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. I have a lot of notes on the remake, most of which aren't very important.
But you gotta get something good out of it.
Yeah, I do. I have to, because I own it. I have a mantra when Sam Rockwell's in a film that isn't that great. And that mantra is, I will never hate a Sam Rockwell film. And I say it over and over again, because the man is so good. Yeah, exactly, right? Sam Rockwell's amazing. Moon is one of the most amazing films I've ever seen. Everything I loved about the original Poltergeist is completely ruined in the remake. And I don't even like to think of it as a remake. I've been trying to think of it as a sequel with a little bit of a science fiction tinge to it. I like to think that Madison is actually a clone of Carol Ann, but that they had adopted. But the clone, something went wrong in the process, and she's just not quite right. That's why she looks like sort of a cheaper Carol Ann and like makes some weird choices.
I love that they made I love that they made the poster, the image of the clown. It's as if to say, "Hey, this is the part that really scared you when you were a kid. Scared you when you were a kid. Well, let's go ahead and feature that." Yeah,
that's another thing I had too. The fact that like somebody in a meeting at one point was like, "Oh, everybody was afraid of this clown. Let's just have a whole bunch of clowns in this one. People will be terrified. It'll be great." But I think my biggest problem with this movie is they take the family dynamic, this beautiful portrait of this imperfect family that are just making it work and definitely love each other and are very comfortable around each other, and it's just the family's so well done. To take that and just do the opposite, essentially, where you don't get a whole lot of characterization about the family, and what you do, you kind of see Sam Rockwell's character as the dad, kind of like a pushy jerk to his nerdy son, trying to get him to play sports and be braver and stuff like that. And they jump right into the scares. They skip a lot of the characterization that really makes the original work. And I think that's a lot of the reason the remake didn't, was because they didn't spend enough time with that dynamic, and they just tried to jump right into the horror.
Just a sort of forced cash cow.
Right, exactly. And the other thing that bugs me is this is Ghost House put this out, and this is Sam Raimi's production company, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sam Raimi. Shame on you, Sam Raimi. You should know that.
I mean, there were some parts I liked as far as like how they set up the family, just because they kind of took the angle that obviously this family is Sam Rockwell. The Bowens are basically like kind of trying to find a new home, and it's during the recession, and he's lost his job recently. Like I guess he worked for like John Deere, and so you do get like that kind of like the desperation. I like that they kind of made that a factor to like why they actually decide to buy this house, and like why it's so cheap, because they of course they learn later on that they built this suburban neighborhood like on the cemetery. Also that the kid I guess like has like anxiety issues, and so that's why like they don't really believe him when like he claims that there's all these like paranormal things going on. I did like that, but yeah, just for me, like the Bowens aren't the same as the Freelings, and the actors did a good job. It's just I just didn't really feel that they really kind of connected as far as like a family unit that looked believable on the screen.
And I think that was more of a script issue than it was an actor issue. Like, I don't have any problems with any of that. And I think that the biggest sin that this remake did, and I think you'll agree with me here, David, is that kid is such a filthy casual gamer. He's playing some knockoff zombie game on an iPad.
Yeah.
Not even a Vita, not even a DS. Kids playing iPad. And I really did think that little girl was related to Heather O'Rourke. She looked enough like her. I looked it up. She wasn't.
That just means good casting, I guess.
I guess. Oh, and this was even worse than the casual gamer thing. I forgot about this. They used a cover by a band named Spoon. A band named Spoon covered TV set by the Cramps at the end of this movie. I cannot believe they would do that.
They couldn't afford to actually get the real song?
I don't even think it would be that expensive. I can't imagine the Cramps charging that much for.
No, they're not.
Or maybe,
super mainstream.
I mean, Lux is dead, so I imagine Poison Ivy's got most of the rights. So I imagine she was like, "I'm not doing your crappy remake."
Was he dead when this came out?
Yeah, he's been dead for a minute.
R.I.P. Lux.
All right. Yeah.
All right, and with that, as we touched a little on the debatably good or bad remake of Poltergeist, it's time to launch into...
It's pretty bad.
It's time to launch into your film, Corey, Legend of Hell House.
I have chosen 1973's Legend of Hell House. It was written by Richard Matheson, who wrote both the screenplay and the story. He wrote the story in 1971, and I'm saying this because a lot of people call this a ripoff of The Haunting, which was filmed in 1963, or released in 1963. Mm-hmm. I don't remember The Haunting enough to really know if The Legend of Hell House was that much of a ripoff, but I do know that I've seen The Haunting, and I like The Legend of Hell House better.
I don't feel like this was a ripoff so much as an evolution of The Haunting. I think Matheson was really good at story structure, and this took the "is this psychology or truly supernatural" question from The Haunting and answered with a "hell yes, it's definitely supernatural." Yeah, I really like that, and I really like the questions that brought up, and I'll get to that in a minute. So we'll start off with a brief plot synopsis. A physicist is offered £100,000, which I meant to convert to English dollars, because I imagine that's a lot of money. Especially when you consider inflation.
Yeah, that's I wanted to consider inflation, but I forgot, so I'm terrible. I'm sorry. You can do it if you want to, listeners, and let me know in the comments on the Podomatic page or on my Twitter. We'll give you all that information later.
Or on the Facebook page we'll eventually have, or on the or on the blog.
Yep, anywhere you want.
Or iTunes.
Right. A physicist is offered £100,000 to lead his wife and two psychics, one of which is the only sane survivor of another investigation 20 years earlier into the Belasco mansion, the Hell House, to prove the existence of life after death. The house is supposedly haunted by the victims of Belasco himself, but I'll let the surviving psychic, Ben Fisher, played by Roddy McDowall, explain why.
Drug addiction, alcoholism, sadism, bestiality, mutilation, murder, vampirism, necrophilia, cannibalism, not to mention a gamut of sexual goodies. Shall I go on?
How did it end?
If it had ended, we would not be here.
All right, so this movie isn't exactly scary. You'll find a few jump scares here and there, but it relies more on tension and a sense of foreboding doom through the movie. which is mostly accomplished by the score and sound effects. There is some practical effects here. There's some things flying off tables and a lot of shaking tables, things like that. But for the most part, it's the score and the sound effects. A cleverly placed scream here, some moaning and breathing here, along with a fantastic bass line that reminds me a bit of a human heartbeat with occasional horns thrown in. I can't tell you how much I love the score of this film. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. There's a sense of unease throughout, and you can't help but feel something can happen at any moment in this movie. Like, it's just the tension is palpable in this film, and
and the atmosphere is incredible.
Yeah,
it feels very claustrophobic too. Like even like an absence of a music score. You have this huge, Belasco house, which is the Mount Everest of haunted houses, as they say, and it really is just an awesome, like set piece, and it's this huge mansion, but it's like, I watched this like a couple nights ago, and it's really, the scenes in the house really, like you have the chapel, then you have like the seance room, then you have Florence's room, and you really don't see that much of the Belasco house. So yeah, it just feels like very claustrophobic, and these people are all on edge, just waiting for something to happen, and it's just, it is very unsettling.
And the colors are very lush. At times it reminded me of a Dan Curtis film, but at other times it like reminded me of like Giallo, like Mario Bava.
Yeah.
It definitely has that feel to it. Well, it definitely has the feel to it in the set, and some of the camera work too, but we'll get to that later because it's my only complaint I have about this film. Yeah, so this movie would not have worked if even one piece of the puzzle was missing. The director seems to be able to push these actors to get where they need to be while each of them embody their characters perfectly. They never quite overdo it, even when the scene could easily go that way. Every now and again they walk that line of melodrama, and it starts to slowly tilt towards, for lack of a better term, Dark Shadows territory, but it never quite gets there.
It's interesting you say that, because that's exactly what made me think of Dan Curtis. I was like, this is kind of Dark Shadows. They're in the old house. The old house, not the new house. The old house.
Right. But it never quite makes it to that point. Occasionally the camera work gets a little bit over dramatic. There's a few places where
when Florence is featured.
No, it's mostly when Dr. Barrett is monologuing. Actually, yeah, when Dr. Barrett is monologuing, they'll do that old school technique where they do, like, when he's about to say something important, they'll do a quick close up on him. So you'll get these quick melodramatic close up. But that's really my only complaint with the film.
That just is sometimes you notice the camera changes.
Yeah. Sometimes you know that the camera's trying to convey something that it doesn't need to convey. The house itself is perfect. The set design is perfect. What would have been mostly green screen these days is a full mansion. Well, it's not necessarily a full mansion, but they filmed this on location in parts of a palace. I thought I put the name in my notes, but it looks like I might be missing it. But they use the library in this mansion for a lot of shots, and it just looks it looks so lived in with this slightly decomposed look. It's got spiderwebs. It's got all the Gothic sort of mainstays in there, and everywhere you look is a new detail. They just pack this mansion to the gills.
Whenever they're outside, it's completely just foggy.
Yeah, that's another great thing about it. Like even the few scenes that are outside add to the whole foreboding atmosphere of the whole movie, because even during the day it's still all misty and foggy. This whole movie just is just quietly whispering to you that something's going to happen at some point. You've just got to get to that point.
Yeah. I love like the build up with like the timestamps. You're waiting for this like terrible thing to happen. It's just like it starts off with, I think it's like, does it start like at the 17th of December?
Yeah, he gets the gig on the 17th, and then they actually arrive at the mansion on the 20th, and they're set to leave on the 24th. So the entire film is packed into those 4 days.
Yeah, it's just, I feel like there's countdown. Something, absolutely terrifying is going to happen.
And like I said before, the movie definitely walks the line of 60s melodrama, but it never really crosses it. There isn't very much overacting. There's a little bit here and there, I guess, but like I said, it's more the camera causing it than it is the actors and actresses. Florence, the mental psychic, played by Pamela Franklin, reacts to events witnessed with a subdued curiosity and just a hint of fear. She only plays hysterical when the scene actually calls for it. I mean, I know I talk about this a lot, but this is another good example of women not playing the role they're meant to play in the time period. Both Florence and Mrs. Barrett are pretty strong female characters. Florence especially. That first time she's in the room and the poltergeist activity starts happening, she's just dealing with it like she's seen it before, and she knows what's up, and she knows it's going to stop. And I really respect a movie in 1973 willing to give women roles that way. I really dig it.
And another way, as you said, that some people thought it was a ripoff of The Haunting, she is a far stronger person than Eleanor from The Haunting.
Was Eleanor also Eleanor in the remake?
Yes.
Okay, because I remember the remake better than I remember the original. I know that's tragic.
That's a crime.
Yeah, I know. So the second psychic we have is Fisher. Fisher, like I said, was played by Roddy McDowall. He's a man who's been through hell and is barely holding it together.
And he plays it so well.
Yeah, he's playing it perfectly, and he uses this dark cynicism to get through what he knows could possibly be a deadly situation. He's kind of also the jaded harbinger of the movie, reminding everyone that if they don't leave, they will most likely die.
What's to tell? The house tried to kill me. It almost succeeded.
Fisher plays a quiet man that seems like he could snap at any time. You can always tell he's just sitting there holding something back.
Yeah,
and I found him to be... No, go ahead.
I was going to say, at times I thought, this guy is going to turn out to be the villain or something.
Yeah, the first time I saw it was the exact same deal. And I found him to be completely unpredictable on screen. I had no idea what to expect from this character. Dr. Lionel Barrett, the single-minded leader of this team, played by Clive Revel, wants to prove that the hauntings are nothing more than leftover mindless energies that can be dissipated by his scientific machinery. And then you have Anne Barrett, who is played by Gail Honeycutt. She's mainly there as support for her husband, but she finds herself enthralled and then taken over by some of the more erotic forces into the house.
I think when it relates to her husband, while he's a very scientific mind, she's the emotional voice for him in the film. She's the one that grounds him as a sympathetic character.
Oh, exactly. And I'll touch on this later, too, but she's also sort of the one... She's kind of the glue that holds this team together as well, but I'll get to that shortly. An interesting thing I found out about this movie is pretty early on, none of them trust each other.
They're all kind of hostile.
Yeah, they're real hostile, and they're just blaming each other for everything. Each medium thinks the other is being used by the spirits to cause this poltergeist activity, and they both think the other should leave because they're causing everyone else to risk their lives. Dr. Barrett doesn't trust either medium because he thinks that their imaginations are manifesting actions in this thoughtless energy surrounding the house. Therefore, they're the ones causing the haunting, and they're the ones endangering everyone and the experiment. While his wife Anne spends a lot of her time trying to keep them together until she starts manifesting spirits of her own. And although distrusting, everyone seems to generally care for each other. That was another interesting choice I think the movie made, to have these people completely distrust each other, but nobody really tries to sell anybody out.
Yeah, but they don't hate each other.
Yeah, and for a group of 4 people who've essentially just met, with the exception of the husband and the wife, they're pretty well in this together, and I like that a lot too.
I loved how this film really highlighted Roddy McDowall's sort of dramatic talent.
Yeah, they really asked a lot out of that guy, and he
delivered.
Yeah, he delivers. Yeah.
He delivered, yeah. To me, this movie asks a lot of really interesting questions as well. Questions like, do spirits have a personality, or are they mindless energies waiting for us to inject our fears into them? Does this power influence them, or are they influencing us? And that happens. They fight about this throughout the whole movie. And I don't want to go into too much more detail here because I want people to see this movie with fresh eyes. And yeah, exactly.
I will say that when you're dining in a notoriously haunted mansion, maybe you should avoid putting toothpicks in the hors d'oeuvres.
Yeah, that would be a really wise decision. And when you're standing under a chandelier in this movie, maybe just move a few steps to your right or left. Just chances are it's going to fall on you.
Mm-hmm. And don't taunt the ghost when you are standing under a chandelier.
Yeah, that's a very good plan, too. Mm-hmm. This movie's basically about a decent ensemble cast trapped inside a house trying to find out if science or spirituality can save them.
I think all 3 movies that we picked today really typified the genre in a good way. They were some great examples of the extremely different stories you can present just with a haunted house.
Yeah, I do too. They're all pretty... I mean, yours kind of opens up more than David's and I. Like, you get into the town and you get into a little more of the mythos surrounding the whole thing. David and I's movie tend to stick to one area, but I think mine is probably the most closed off. Because, like I said, Poltergeist has all these little secret stories, if you will, that are being told while the movie's going on.
Well, I don't think there's anything wrong at all with that kind of narrowed setting, as long as you got phenomenal acting and script writing, which I think all three of these films did have.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I like that, especially with like the Legend of Hell House, just Emmerich Belasco presence in the house. He's kind of like described as like this like Aleister Crowley kind of figure.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, just like kind of a difference between like the other movies is that while Maddie's is kind of more like an eldritch horror kind of haunting, Poltergeist is, as you kind of learn in the the films, is like it's almost like a commentary on like how like urban planning, just they don't care. Like they're just out there to make money, and they don't. And then you have this Emmerich Belasco who does all these like depraved acts, and Roddy McDowall kind of goes into it with like alcoholism and like depravity and all this other stuff. But yeah, definitely kind of like, and just how that kind of affects like the Poltergeist too in the house, where it kind of affects the I forget her name. Is it Ann Barrett, the wife of Lionel Barrett?
Yeah, Ann Barrett.
Okay, yeah, like how it kind of like manipulates her, and the spirit of Daniel, who kind of manipulates Florence Tanner.
I felt towards the end of Legend of Hell House, I really wanted to yell along with him, Belasco!
Yeah.
And that was the one point that Roddy McDowall could have ended up overacting, but I think he still managed to rein it in enough to keep that fairly believable.
Yeah, especially because he's like trying to kind of redeem himself after failing the first time in the investigation, I guess.
Right. Failing spectacularly, apparently. I think there was only one other survivor, and that survivor was just completely insane now.
Yeah, and like crippled.
Else died. Yeah. Well, maybe there was a crippled, an insane, and a dead one. I forget exactly.
I think one was paralyzed. Do we have any final thoughts tonight?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Well, remember, guys, you can check us out on the blog, Hallow-Holic.blogspot.com, or the mirror site, Hallow-Holic.wordpress.com. Check us out on the Podomatic site, Hallow-Holic.podomatic.com.
You can find us on Twitter at Hallow-Holics Anonymous, Hallow-Holics Anonymous, or at Terra Nowhere. Oh, look, guys, a friendly-looking old woman cowering in that dark corner. Maybe she can give us directions.